Bonjour, enchanté, ça va? Très bien. Je m'appelle Daniel, and that is as much French as I can speak. So I'm going to ask you to do me a favor today. If I'm speaking too fast, just put your hands up and I'll try and slow down. If I'm speaking too slow, I don't know what that is in French, but hurry up. So I've got a secret to tell you. They are lying to you. Who are lying to you, you may ask? My colleagues, my friends, my family, the government? The answer is, of course, yes. But that's not what I'm talking to you about today. Instead, I mean reports. Reports are lying to you. Specifically, research reports. And I can say this, I've been a UX researcher for about 20 years now, and I'm here to tell you that research reports are shit. Now, that's a big statement, but by the end of this talk, I hope to have convinced you and explained to you why I believe this to be true, help you understand what we can do about it, some ideas on how we can go about making better decisions. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. So first, let me tell you a bit about myself and why you should listen to me. So I'm a user experience researcher. My first professional graphic design contract when I was 14 years old. They didn't know. When I went, it was a property development company, and I did logo and design. And when we went, I was invited to the opening. My dad took me because I was a child. And they went, Daniel. No, this is my child. And my first proper job outside of college was designing bathrooms for millionaires, including Sting and Madonna. That was a lot of fun. And then later, but my real love was graphic design and product design, and I became the founder of a digital agency. Since then, I've designed products for Just Eat, Honda, Microsoft, Samsung, a few others. And I'm creator of the Atomic Research Process. I'm also founder of a product called Gleanly. Gleanly is an insights-based knowledge repository, and me and my team have been building this for about 4 years now. And why are we building a knowledge management system? It's because reports are shit. So why? Why do I say this? There's 5 main reasons. Let's go through them. So the first one, reports are biased. As I said, I'm a user researcher. My job is to do unbiased research. A great deal of research training is to ensure results are not biased by the person undertaking the research. However, that's not so true for reports. In most cases, the report is telling you our recommendations. And what we think we're doing is saying, here is the evidence to support our recommendations. The problem is that quite often the evidence supplied in a report is only the evidence that supports those recommendations. So I've been guilty of this in the past, if I'm being honest, and I speak to hundreds of teams a year, and very few disagree with me that this is true. And the problem is if you are the decision maker, it is you that needs to make the decision, and you that will be held accountable if that decision is wrong. One of my favorite phrases as a UX researcher is, it's not my job to be right, it's my job to find out what is right. And that's not always the case for project managers or product owners, decision makers like yourselves. And I hope, actually, if I could take a pause and say, I hope it's okay that I'm speaking to you as decision makers and product managers and people. I'm sure there are people here who do research as well. In fact, can we do a quick poll? How many people here have a role like is product owner, project manager? Most of you, that's great. Are there any UX designers or researchers in the room? Oh, there's a few hands, good. So with those people who just had your hands up, UX designers, researchers, people who do research, put your hands up again if you think you may have written reports where you are delivering the evidence the decision maker needs to agree with the decision you've already made. Sorry, that's a complicated sentence. So do you think, yeah, there's some honest people in the room, thank you. So that's great. So that's one issue. The next issue is reports suffer from tunnel vision, and I'm not sure how well that translates. Thank you so much for Jonathan for helping with the translations today. So reports are usually written concerning only the findings of that research exercise, which makes sense. So we did this user test, and this is what we learnt. And that's fine, except it doesn't really give us a picture of what else is known outside of that, does it? So how can we make good quality decisions from just one source of evidence? You might think, well, I take into consideration other things. You know, when I'm making decisions, I'm aware of everything. But in reality, it's difficult to gather all that knowledge together, and it's difficult to be objective about what you actually know on the subject. You're relying on your memory, and you're going to be more biased towards the study that's just been delivered to you. So the next problem, reports make it hard to compare the evidence. And I don't just mean in terms of comparing evidence from other sources. As we just discussed, that is difficult. But it's also hard to compare evidence within the actual report. In most reports that I've seen, most research reports that I've seen, you have the overview and maybe the experiment design at the front, and then the actual findings in the middle, maybe some discussion, and then the recommendations at the end. And it can be quite hard to say, right, how do these things connect? You're going backwards and forwards. You know, what's the evidence to that recommendation? Is it actually strong? So this makes it really hard to work out how things connect. How strong is the evidence for this recommendation, and does it really support this idea? Reports are hard to search. In the last 2 points, I mentioned some issues with comparing research that you've just done with existing research. But what about the actual process of finding old reports, other research that's been done? Now, you might have a really good filing system. It may be that it's quite easy to find reports on a certain subject. But even in those cases, and I expect that isn't true, is it? How many companies actually do have good filing systems for their reports? Few. But even then, a lot of things that you discover, or we discover as researchers and deliver to you guys, are not concerning what we were studying. We discover other interesting things. And if I'm writing a report that isn't based on that subject, it makes it quite hard to discover. And I'll talk a little bit more about what this issue particularly in a minute. So reports are hard to discover, but what happens when we do? This leads to the next problem. Reports are fixed in time. They're a representation of what you know now and what you might decide to do. For most research reports, what happened after is not recorded. And of course, that isn't practical. It's not what a research report is meant to be doing. We have other methods and tools for that. But the problem is that when someone comes to find your report, if they can, and then uses it to inform their work, they don't know what happened after. Perhaps you did more work and discovered that the evidence was flawed, or maybe there are other factors that are misleading. And this isn't an unusual thing. Knowledge evolves over time. People used to believe that diseases were spread in the air. And they're right, diseases can be airborne. But they thought it was the smell that was the issue. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. Those doctors of ancient times, they weren't wrong, and they weren't stupid. They were correct based on the evidence they had, but we know better now, don't we? So no one goes back to their old reports and says, we were wrong, don't do this. So how can we solve this problem? Well, first of all, don't panic. I have a solution I'd like to share with you. But first, let me take you back a few years when I was working for a company called Just Eat. It's the world's biggest food takeaway marketplace. I know it's in France. It was à la resto at the time. Do you remember à la resto? So that photo on the right here, I love this photo. I'm holding a massive receipt. I had the opportunity to order every single thing on a restaurant's menu. For a project I was working on. And actually, this led to the taking down of a giant money laundering ring. But that's the story for another day. Come and grab me after if you want to know. It sounds more interesting, doesn't it? Anyway, shortly after this photo was taken, I had the opportunity to found and lead the accessibility team at Just Eat. And this team was unusual in that it had representation from every part of the company. And accessibility affects every part of a company, doesn't it? But that's lots of countries, lots of products, lots of facing the customer, facing the restaurant internally, so many different contexts. And it was great because the organization really got behind this. Everyone got really excited about becoming more accessible and very passionate about it. But it did mean we had an avalanche of research and reports coming in from all around the company and all around the globe. And for our little team, this was impossible to manage. So the biggest issue we had was that we had knowledge, that the knowledge being delivered was in the form of reports which obscured the insights. And it made it hard to quickly gather information and find out what we knew. Very few of the reports were about accessibility. They just had discovered accessibility adjacent knowledge. Does that make sense? So when we pulled the insights out of the report, we lost all that valuable context, which was also really important. So we decided to focus on how we could theme research to make it more discoverable. We had all this research, and the idea is we wanted to, within those themes, have specific insights, and then researchers and people supplying knowledge could connect the evidence they had to support an insight. And then if they had new insights that didn't seem to be covered, they could create a new thing. And others might say, actually, I've got some research to support that. And they could add that one as well. And in this way, we had self-managing nodes of knowledge. And we realized one piece of evidence could support multiple insights across multiple themes. Actually, this is when it started getting complicated, especially when we started connecting those insights into actionable recommendations, which could be supported by multiple sources. So it became even more unmanageable, and it was time to formalize the process and find out a way of dealing with this. Now, I'm often credited as the inventor of atomic UX research. In fact, I introduced myself as such. But it's important to mention this work came about due to the collaboration with many people and inspiration from other existing sources. So one person I particularly want to shout out is David Yates. He's a great UX designer now, looking after Superdry, I believe. And David gave me the first spark of this process when we were talking about the problem, and he was drawing on a whiteboard. And what he was drawing reminded me of Atomic Design by Brad Frost. Brad Frost, if I can speak. And this process, this is a process you might already be aware of, you might already be using it, and it's one that we were using successfully. So atomic design helps you to break down a really complex UI into small atomic parts to make it really easy to manage. And I thought, well, if we can do that for UI, maybe we can do that for knowledge. And after a lot of work and finessing with many people inside and outside of Just Eat, this is what we came up with. It's a deceptively simple process with 4 distinct parts or atoms that create molecules of knowledge. And I should point out, there's a mistake in this title. There's a mistake in how we named it. It shouldn't be atomic UX research, it's just atomic research, right? It's not just for UX and user research items. It does work for any type of knowledge. Now, the problem is, I don't feel I can change that to atomic research because everyone will think I'm working on like power stations or bombs. So it's sticking for now. Anyway, it starts with experiments. So this is what we did to discover the knowledge. And it doesn't need to be as formal as an experiment. Some people prefer to call this study or activity. And this can be anything from a large-scale study to just overhearing something on the bus on the way to work. But it gives context for the facts. And facts are what we learnt. A good fact is a quote, an observation, or a statistic, but it's never our opinion. Insights, however, are our opinions on why the facts they are, the cause and the effect, the cause of what made those facts happen, and the effect that has on us and our organization, the product. It's the connection between the fact and the recommendation, how we will proceed. So recommendations are what we're going to do with this knowledge, the actionable result of what's come before. And most recommendations are testable. So new experiments are created and the cycle continues. It's the miracle of life. And this is the secret to creating a scalable knowledge repository that both retains the what and the why certain decisions are made, and importantly, what happened after. Each of these atoms connect together to create a molecule of knowledge. Now, actually, a lot of people call this a nugget of knowledge, like a chicken nugget. And that's because of the great work Thomas Sharon's done on the subject. He's been a fantastic thinker and worth looking up if you're interested in this subject. But this simple process becomes really powerful when we look at it at the perspective of each of those elements. So what we're seeing here is a molecule or nugget from this perspective of a fact. This is what the world looks like to that fact. So a fact always belongs to an experiment because that is so intrinsic to how it was learnt. We can't remove the finding from where it was found, right? But a fact can be connected to multiple insights. And this is great because we might have lots of ideas of why the world is the way it is. Why have we discovered these things? What does it mean? And we can have different ideas. And this process really supports that. We don't need to argue about one idea, and we can explore lots of reasons. And it's also important we can connect negatively. Can you see that red dotted line going down? The two insights at the top are supported by this fact. The one below, this is evidence against this insight. So this means that we can connect evidence saying this isn't true as well as is true, or it's evidence against. And this is what it looks like from the perspective of an insight. So you can see here that the insight is connected to lots of facts across, in this case, 2 experiments. But it could be as many as, there's no limit. There's no limit to how many experiments. And once again, it's supported by facts and has facts connected to disprove it, to go against it. And it can do the same for the recommendation. An insight can support multiple recommendations or go against them as well. And that's really great. I love to synthesize my research with my cross-functional team, especially my PMPO. And having that ability to have a range of ideas is really wonderful. I'm from a design background. I'm biased towards solving problems with UI. But a database engineer in that same team would have very different thoughts to myself. So having a diverse range of views is really important, not just on roles, but different backgrounds, etc. So this tends to be the view that us researchers prefer. If I'm looking at another person's research, I normally look from the perspective and insight. I'm interested in what you learnt. I'm interested also in the evidence that supports it. And maybe I'm interested in what you did after, but really it's the insights that I'm most interested in. Whereas this is the view that stakeholders, decision makers, product owners, PMs, management, this is the view that people who want to see, right, what is the recommendation? Researchers can share the recommendation along with the thinking or insights that led to this idea and the evidence that supports those insights. You get a holistic view that makes it clear what evidence we have for and against, and it allows you to make informed decisions. You can understand that evidence at the level that makes sense to you, and it's great for the researchers. We only need to share one molecule or nugget, and you can self-manage the detail you prefer. I'll talk more about that in a second. Our clients love this process, and it reduces reporting by about 60 to 80%. So after a lot of work on this process from many people, as I mentioned, I actually wrote an article on Medium, and this article, within a year, was viewed about 40,000 times. And I knew we were onto something really interesting, really big, when it became the foundation for research for the European Commission research team. Now, many organizations from massive tech companies to government institutions, down to individual researchers are using this process from around the world. And it's very much taken its own life and its own many people have their own methods and changes and alterations to this, and that's fine. Every organization is different, isn't it? So feel free to take what I'm talking about today and twist it, change it, make it work for you. And the good news is you can keep on using the same tools that you've always loved. So over here, the research analytics tools, as long as these output findings that are evidence-based, it can be brought into the atomic flow as a fact. We make those facts available for everyone, democratizing research. And the facts are processed into insights and recommendations, allowing us to make decisions, which are then handed over to the project management tools. There's probably some logos you recognize there. And it's important to understand these are just examples, right? It can work with any kind of tool. So just these aren't specifics. So let's go back over those issues we talked about and discuss how this process can help for each one of those. So first of all, reports are biased. Atomic research forces people to think about the evidence they have for an assertion and keep themselves evidence-led. And for you, it's easy to see the recommendation and the thinking behind that recommendation or the insights and the evidence that supports or goes against those ideas. As a decision maker, you can choose how much detail you need. You can read the recommendation and just glance if it's low risk or a really easy decision to make. Or you can dive deeper and see what the evidence is that supports those insights. If you want, you can read every customer comment and all of the data that came together to form the recommendation. And you might even want to understand the experiment itself better to ensure it's relevant for what you're working on. You choose your own fidelity and what's best for you. And even better than that, you get to see everything, not just what I choose to show you. So it is possible to game this system, of course it is, but it also becomes really obvious when the evidence doesn't reflect what's being proposed, like in this situation here. And I should mention, actually, this is probably a good time to mention, I'm showing you screenshots here from my Gleanly product, but there is no need to use a specific tool for this. You know, this tool has been built for this process, but there's other teams, many teams around the world that are using whatever products they have already and other tools as well. So don't feel that, you know, this has to be using this product. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for us researchers, this is really great as well. You can self-manage the level that you want, but we don't need to spend ages writing a detailed report just for it to be left on a heap, probably, right? We can share just what we need to, and you can get involved in actually creating the insights recommendation. A report is fixed. You can't easily add to it. But as I mentioned earlier, Atomic doesn't just allow you multiple points of view, but it encourages it. It encourages broad thinking. So if you have an idea or aware of evidence from another product or project, you can bring that together and create insights and recommendations in a way that doesn't disregard other ideas. So reports suffer from tunnel vision. As I mentioned, the key superpowers is being able to join up evidence from multiple sources from across our organization. And in fact, when your repository starts getting more mature, it's possible to answer some questions with only the evidence that you already have in your repository. And this, of course, is another time saver. But in those cases, actually, it's worth mentioning that sometimes when you have evidence from different parts of the organization, the context may be different. For example, maybe it came from a different company or a different product, or perhaps it's just become dated. So we might want to retest this. But even in those cases, we are choosing what we study based on evidence, which is going to give us a greater chance of success, isn't it? And then when we come to look at our findings, we're able to make decisions based on everything we know, not just that specific study. And that evidence is right there, connected clearly, telling us what supports and what disproves our theories. In other words, it makes it easy to compare the evidence. And importantly, it makes it easy to compare different types of evidence as well. This isn't the greatest example of that, actually. But for example, qualitative research, such as interviews and user tests, with more qualitative research, such as, I've got that wrong way around, for more qualitative research, such as interviews and user tests, with quantitative research, such as A/B tests or usage data. I actually got that wrong on my notes. That's terrible, isn't it? But because this process is agnostic, not just on source, but on subject, on anything, we can bring any kind of research, any kind of knowledge to bear, as long as it's evidence-based. One of the most common problems amongst our customers is trying to de-silo knowledge, not just between products, but teams and disciplines too. For example, we know that marketing have lots of useful data. Customer support are on the front line. Sales, business strategy, perhaps even management. And at Gleanly, we have lots of non-UX teams using the product. The most unusual is a murder investigation bureau. And it's really interesting because in a murder inquiry, you have lots of different types of evidence, from physical crime scene evidence, observed evidence such as CCTV, interview statements from witnesses, and even more and more smartphones and smart devices on a scene. And it's really difficult to compare all of those different types of evidence together in a useful way. And this is one thing that Atomic's helping with. So, reports are fixed in time. So, Atomic Research solves this by allowing you to connect new evidence as it becomes available. And this has been really useful recently with such big world events changing our way of life. We may have evidence from a few years ago that's changed massively due to COVID, energy crisis, so many things. In fact, we're just onboarding a UK bank at the moment. And we had a really interesting conversation the other day, and they said, Daniel, like, people think that banks are very traditional, very slow moving. And they said, you know, in some ways that is true. But at the time, our Prime Minister just managed to tank the entire economy and send interest rates flying, and people were losing their mortgages, and mortgages were overnight. And they said, we need to react at a moment's notice. Things can change overnight for an organization, and we need to be able to react to that in our decision-making and in our strategies too. So this can be true for different contexts as well. So we've got 3 A/B tests here. We tested this in the UK, and we can see that, yeah, it seemed to have a good effect. It cost us some money of sales, but it increased profits. That's great. We tested it in France, even more so, even more profits. This is wonderful. And then we tested it in Italy. Something went wrong here. So what happened? So my first reaction here is I think there's a bug in the test. I think there's a problem. Maybe it wasn't properly coded in Italy. Maybe there was a problem with translation. So maybe we can rescue this A/B test and bring it back into a positive. Maybe there is still a win to be had there. But perhaps, as an English person, there's something in Italy that I don't understand culturally. So once I've ruled out those easy things, let's go and let's bring some qualitative into this. Let's go and speak to some Italian people, and I've got some Italian family, and it doesn't sound right to me, but maybe there's something I'm missing. They might say, yeah, Dan, you wouldn't know, but in Italy, this is how it works. Well, that's great. Okay, so now we know that market better. We can bring that evidence to bear. We can bring in a new experiment, a discussion with Italians, and understand the culture and understand how we can better serve those customers. And perhaps maybe we can improve business even more. So this brings me on to this point. Reports are hard to search. And because of the way that Atomic is broken down, it's designed to be easy to find insights and evidence about a certain subject, even when those studies aren't about that subject. Remember, this is where we started from, wasn't it? And actually, one of the first companies I worked with outside of Just Eat, so I left Just Eat to kind of work on Atomic, and I was consulting with a company. We started bringing all of their recent existing user research all together into this process. And there were these same comments kept coming up. Not every study, but maybe every other study. You know, maybe 1 or 2 and 3 studies it would come up. Just a small comment about the subject. And we kept on seeing this. There was a pattern. And so we took that evidence to the team that owned this problem. I can't say what the problem was, but it was a really serious issue. It was really easy to fix. It took them less than 2 weeks to fix it. But they told me after, this would have stopped them going into their main trading period, a period where they make 70% of their revenue. And it would have meant that they wouldn't have been able to successfully trade in that period. And luckily, they managed to fix it and implement it, but it was only caught by being able to connect the evidence across hundreds of studies that weren't about that subject. We weren't aware that that was even a problem to be afraid of. So I'm quite proud. Atomic research saved a company's life in its very first outing. I was very happy about that. On a more common level, it's extremely powerful for us researchers and product designers to be able to go in and find out what we know on a subject at a click of the button. For the product designers in the room, how often are you asked to knock up a design or a wireframe at short notice? And see nods. In those instances, we haven't got time to spend ages looking for reports and reading through them, trying to find those lovely little tasty chicken nuggets of information. We need to be able to move quickly. And we can, with the way that Atomic breaks out insights, it allows us to dive in and find out what we already know. And for you decision makers, product owners, etc., it's so helpful to be able to see a list of evidence-led recommendations that you can filter by priority, by complexity, by opportunity, whatever you want. And I have to tell you, that makes life so much easier. So in summary, I've got one other thing to talk about, but in summary about what we were just saying, here's some of the benefits for the Atomic process for those doing the research. And I haven't got notes here, so I'm going to have to look at the screen. So it removes personal bias. It encourages retesting. It forces you to think about the why, often leading to more innovative results. I tell you, that's a really simple but powerful thing, being forced to say, what the customer did this, and we're going to do that. But why? What's that middle bit? It can be quite difficult, but really powerful. And that often leads to innovative solutions. It gives a really good framework for non-researchers and allows large scale in organizations with almost no management, very low management. Of course, it does need an owner, but it's not a constant, it's not a full-time job, that's for sure, even with some of the biggest clients we work with. And for the repository, for you guys more, we get a holistic view of the evidence from the whole organization and beyond. Remember, we don't need to only record our research. We can record white papers, industry research, news articles, anything we discover from around the world. We can show evidence for something and against, give a real balanced, holistic view. It allows us to move quickly, but with confidence, and it really encourages collaboration. I left that one to the last, but I think that's a really important one. Another benefit is it really allows, is a really powerful thing to get people involved in the research, especially you guys, right? How often are you excluded from that, researchers are going off doing their research, here's what we've discovered, we've done it all for you, you can just kind of rubber stamp it and give us some money. We need to include people into the research, have that diverse views, have people, I think also, maybe I'm slightly biased in this because as a researcher, I find I don't really fully understand it unless I'm part of the process. I find it hard to read research reports and really kind of get what's being known. And I don't just mean as a consumer of knowledge, but creating it too. So actually, back at my office at the moment, my team are working out how we can implement a new security service. And security is always our highest priority. Now, this isn't user research at all. It's very much technical-led, but it is going to affect the product and the product decisions that we make. And they will be putting their information into Gleanly so we can all share what they know, right? Now, the biggest benefit of all, and what it all comes down to is making better decisions. And this is why UX research exists. This is why knowledge exists, right, in a company. This is why we spend money on knowledge. This is why I have a job, and it's the reason you guys have a job, is to make better decisions. And this is what it all comes down to. is to help make better evidence-based, more informed decisions. And I had to show you this screenshot. It's just from a few days ago, actually. I had to chuck it in here. So Phil here is a delivery manager for a client of mine. And it's great to see his reaction, seeing all the evidence laid out for him to dive into and get involved and ultimately make better decisions. I just like that. It was just so simple. Ooh. Yes, this is when I was practicing this the other day, and I was like, I've missed such an important thing. Not just making decisions, but for you guys, right, defending those decisions. And in case you think I'm being more too utopian in what I'm thinking, you know, I recognize this is a reality of our jobs, right? Once we've made the decision, the Atomic Repository can actually help you defend them. And I remember talking to a project manager a few years ago now, I was chatting to, and she was telling me how she'd recently had some research, some data come in that forced them to reprioritize what they're working on. And the problem is that deprioritized some features that were the CEO's. It was his pet features that he really loved. And so he wasn't happy about this, of course. So he called the PM into the office to question her decisions, and she was able to pull out her Atomic Repository and talk him through, this is the evidence that we had, this is how we made that decision, this is where we got to this situation. And not only did she not get in any trouble, he commended her on making such a good call. And then he also asked for access to their knowledge repository so he could keep on top of the evidence coming in. It was so wonderful. And she said, I get the meetings I have with him now are so much shorter because he knows already what we're working on. He knows the evidence behind it. He knows that we're doing our jobs and we're good at our jobs. They were all aware of the same information and pull in the same direction. And I'm not going to claim that Atomic solves every problem that organization has. Of course it doesn't. But having a shared knowledge is a big step towards that direction. I've had several onboarding sessions and workshops with clients where people have come into the room and so I didn't know we had a UX department. That's happened at least 3 times that I remember. And if they didn't know a whole department existed in their organization, how can they be pulling in the same direction? How can they all be trying to move forward? So just simply knowing what teams are doing, that sparks conversation, encourages collaboration, and innovation and value cannot be far behind. So very quickly, I'm going to run through some tools. How are we doing for time, by the way? I failed to start my timer on here. 5 minutes, okay, we're okay. So I've got whole talks just about how to do atomic research, what tools you can use, best practices, things like that. So if you're really interested, I really recommend having a look on YouTube, maybe seeing some of those. But very quickly, the most simple and obvious way is with sticky notes. Just simply using it as a synthesis process. This process was created to try and make scaling a knowledge repository easier, being able to bring all of those insights together. But it works as a synthesis tool. That's how it does its job. And many people just use it for that. Just find benefit in using it as a way of thinking about their knowledge. So sticky notes are a good way, or Miro. FigJam's great as well. I started getting into FigJam recently. Airtable's a good next step, especially if you're trying to make it an actual repository. And Thomas Sharon, who I mentioned earlier, he used to be head of research for WeWork. I think he's Goldman Sachs now. But he actually created an Airtable base called Polaris that's around his thinking on Atomic. And he's made it available for everyone for free. So now it is quite focused on WeWork, but there's another team as well, Devo team, Martin Aguirre at Devo team, a good French company there. They're using their consultancy clients and have shared it to others as well, so you can use that as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I built an MVP of a tool specifically for this with my friend and colleague David Barker about 4 years ago now, and we started working with 5 UX teams in different companies that were struggling to manage their knowledge. And then in 2020, we got VC funding and allowed us to build a whole team and build a fully realized Atomic UX repository. So we created this because we wanted a tool built for purpose. But I want to be clear that nothing I'm talking about today can't be done without this tool. You know, you probably have the tools already at your disposal. So I'm going to undermine everything I just said. Reports are great. I know I said they're shit, but there's also positives. So let me just finish up by defending reports just a little. Reports are fixed in time. Now, this is a problem. I've already mentioned this is a problem, but it's also good. It's also useful. We need a snapshot of what we knew and what we were thinking at a certain point of time. And reports can tell us more than just evidence. They can speak to other factors in our environment that may not be evidence-based. Pressure from management, team dynamics, people leaving, whatever's happening at the time. As much as I love atomic research, and I believe it's incredibly powerful, it can miss that wider context that isn't easily incorporated with experiment, fact, insight, and recommendation. Sometimes it's just useful to be able to tell a story. And we're actually working on trying to change reports at the moment. We think we can do reports better. So ironic that I'm saying reports are shit and we're building a feature called reports. But this is in recognition that reports do solve a purpose despite their many failings. But I think we can do better. We can record a moment in time, but also be able to show what's new. Allow other people to come in and see what we knew at the time and what other factors were in play. And it's also why our motto is making knowledge usable. I'd love you to try the process for yourself, whether that's using our tool. I'd love you to use our tool, but I'm more interested in trying the process. I'm here to advocate for the process. And feel free to reach out to me, whatever tools you're using. Tell me how you're getting on. Tell me what you're struggling with. See if it's something I've come across before. I might be able to help you. Or how you may have changed it. It's always really interesting to see, like, actually, we added a layer on because of this. Anyway, I think I'm out of time now. So I just want to finally thank so much everybody for coming to listen to me. Thank you to Octo for inviting me. Thank you, Jonathan, for translating my slides. And thank you all of you for being so patient. Merci.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this presentation. You told us that we can reach you for any question. How can we reach you, actually?
You can get me on Twitter at Dan Piddy. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I don't know what I'm called on there, but my name, Daniel Pidcock, I assume. But just on the website, send a message. We've got live chat on there. Half the time, that'll be me answering the questions on there, so don't be afraid. I'm here to help.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Merci à vous et bonne fin de journée.